Hey, Paul, what's happening?
Hey Pete, it's Friday. Always a good day.
Friday. Why aren't we at the golf course? What's going on? Why are we here? Jeez.
You're right. I'll see you. I'm going right now.
Awesome. Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another episode of Power Hour. We have a absolutely fantastic guest here today. Paul Butterfield is joining us from the fine state of Utah. We're going to get into scaled sales organizations, enablement, all sorts of fun stuff. Paul's been around the block a couple times, has a lot of stuff to kind of share with us. But before we
Is
kind
that
of
a
get
backhanded
started
way of
there,
saying I'm old, Pete? Just wondering.
I think what you mean is seasoned.
Season. Thank you. That's much better.
Seasoned,
Yeah.
tenured, right?
There you
go. Before we get slamming here, any big plans for the weekend here? Are you gonna be jamming with your band? Or are you gonna be hitting the golf course? What are you gonna be doing, Paul?
I wait all year for college football to start, and we're in full swing. So I'll be watching
Nice.
the Gators play in the afternoon, and then locally, our BYU Cougars have Baylor coming to town for our home kickoff. So it's all football tomorrow.
Amazing. Are you gonna go to the BYU game?
Yes, yeah, we're season ticket holders for that.
Oh.
So, unfortunately, the games aren't at the same time, so I get to see them both. But golf actually got some of that scheduled for later this month. We're still in that window in Utah where you golf easily for another 6 to 8 weeks. So
there you go. Right. I mean, hey, like technically, like you can golf when it's snowy out too if you get the orange balls out there and like no, I don't know. Yeah, I think we're going to be doing a little bit of college football this weekend as well. We're season ticket holders at Stanford, and
nice.
We're going to go down tomorrow and probably watch Stanford get their butt kicked by USC. I think is what's on the docket.
Yeah.
But that's okay because like my 5-year-old just likes to like roll around in the dirt at the tailgate.
We're coming to town in late November. Maybe I should come.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I mean, hey, if you want to travel, I'd love to host you at our tailgate. That'd be amazing. Fabulous. All right. Well, let's get jamming here because I think we have a lot of great stuff to talk about. So, hey, everyone, thank you for joining us with Modern Sales Power Hour. I'm Pete Kazanjy. Just to kind of refresh everybody's memory on what Power Hour is all about. What we want people to do is have audience participation. We have an illustrious, seasoned sales enablement leader here. So if you have, rep training questions, manager enablement questions, and also like, things beyond that as well. Like Paul's done a number of things outside of enablement as well. Paul is at your disposal. I'm at your disposal as well. We have a bunch of questions that were kind of like submitted ahead of time, so I'm pumped to get into that. In the chat, just go ahead and let us know where you're calling in from, and you can also use that as a mechanism by which to kind of ask questions. Yeah, is anybody else? I'm here in San Francisco. Is anybody else in Utah? Right? Is anybody else calling in from Utah like Paul is? So for folks who are not familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. So MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related disciplines. The community's mission is to create an environment for our 27,000 and growing members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own, help them see around corners they may not know about, etc. And so the way that we do that is through live sessions like this, through our robust online forum, which is really great for answering asynchronous questions, right? Because people like Paul see them and then answer them back, which is great. And then also in-person events. In fact, actually coming up, we have a in-person event happening. We have a happy hour for Dreamforce, which is going to be pretty sweet. 2 weeks from now, we're renting out De La Rosa restaurant over, not too far from Moscone Center. For modern sales people who are going to be in town in San Francisco for Dreamforce, or if you're just based in like the San Francisco Bay Area, even when Dreamforce isn't happening, then please come join us. Before we get started, just a couple of reminders. Power Hour is a unique format. There's not really a specific piece of content we're going to be going through. Instead, we're here to kind of pick the brain of our illustrious guests here. And so please go ahead and do that. We're here to learn. This is Q&A. So please ask your questions, use the chat tab, etc. And so with that, let's go ahead and just jump into some introductions here. I'll make mine super quick. My name's Pete Kazanjy. I am the founder of Atrium. Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that helps manage like sales managers, so AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers, leaders, reps use metrics and data to improve performance. Prior to this, I started a software company called TalentBin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. Wrote a book on startup sales called Founding Sales as well, and I started Modern Sales Pros in 2016. So I think about sales just a little bit, sales excellence, etc. Paul, why don't you kind of give us a walk through kind of like the things that you've been spending your time on,
Sure.
in the last bit of your career?
Okay. Well, the last bit of my career, I am in my third gig of building out a sales enablement strategy, program, team, etc. I've been overall doing the enablement thing for 11 years or so. Lisa Kelly's on here; she'd probably remember. Prior to that, my whole career was in sales and sales leadership. I started in tech sales with HP. That's brought me to Utah. Actually, I was based out of St. Louis. Came out here when the leadership role opened up. And this turned out to be a great valley to be if you are a tech salesperson, because the whole Silicon Slope scene that's grown up here in 20 years or so I've been here. It is. It's absolutely amazing. So I'm Instructure right now. A lot of people may know Instructure better by our flagship product, Canvas, because if you've been in school or have someone in your family in school in the last decade, odds are they use Canvas.
I've used it. I've used it as a I've used it as a teacher. Actually, my buddy is my buddy teaches a entrepreneurship class at University of Columbia, and he had me come and do a guest lecture on early stage sales leadership, and I had to put all my stuff in Canvas ahead of time.
Very cool. I'm glad to hear it, and thanks for validating that. It is. I mean, Lori and I, my wife, and I love to travel, right? And any corner of the world, when somebody finds a great work for, we love Canvas. It's kind of fun. The prior to that, I was at Vonage for a number of years and built out a sales enablement program and global strategy and everything there. But was recruited here by the CRO, our CRO. I've worked for two other times in my career. So that's what brought me here. But I got into sales enablement originally at a company called In Contact, which we were talking about, a mutual friend, Rusty Jensen, right? So that's why I work with Rusty and some other great people. So I went from being a sales director on a Friday to a sales enablement leader on a Monday. And there's the story there, but it was kind of weird and kind of fun.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I mean, obviously, a lot of fantastic experience here, and like I have a huge crush on Silicon Slope sales organizations because they're like no joke. And I think, that the like as somebody who's very central in like the Silicon Valley ecosystem myself, I feel this is something that I've been kind of like a boulder I've been pushing uphill in the last like 10 years is like, hey guys, not only is it okay to like sales, you kind of should. And if you don't, it's going to be a problem. And you don't ain't none of that stuff exists in the Silicon Slope where it's just like, yeah, that's what we do here. Right. And just have amazing sales organizations that just wear that on their sleeve, or that you're talking about Omniture's fearsome sales, enterprise sales organization, or even just like inside sales organizations that just like crank, Qualtrics is a great example of that. Maybe like Bamboo HR. I'm trying to think like Divvy is out there as well. Just like Workfront, just like a bunch of like really great sales organizations that really advance the threshold of modern sales. So wonderful. So why don't we get into some of our, and as I noted earlier, please do use the chat panel, use the Q&A panel, etc., to ask your questions. But I think maybe a helpful thing to kind of start with here is how should us, like, we probably have a lot of sales leaders who are joining us today. How should sales leaders think about revenue enablement, like if they're going to be setting up a new program?
See, there's let me think of the best place to start, because there are a couple of pillars that they should be thinking about. The first pillar may sound obvious, but in my experience, it's not obvious. It doesn't manifest as an obvious thing. And that is, the program needs to be rooted in revenue impact. Now, to be clear, only sellers generate revenue, but enablement leaders and sales leaders need to be able to, and it's really on the enablement leader to do this. The sales leader, is the end user, excuse me, is their customer. Is reasonable correlation back to whatever enablement activities that we ask sellers to stop selling and do have got to correlate back somehow in a reasonable way to revenue. We're not HR, and if we have any HR leaders on the call, which I doubt, but no disrespect, but in enablement, revenue enablement, we don't deliver government mandated or CYA trainings. Everything that we do has got to be a revenue influencer. Else, why are we doing it?
Yeah, exactly.
So
right.
That's the first thing they should be looking at.
If we're going to take them off the field, there's got to be, like, when they get back on the field, they got to be faster. They got to avoid tackles or whatever.
Or dangerous.
And then, yeah, exactly. And so what we got to, and then so, probably what that means is any program you're thinking about probably should be tied to some sort of metric you would anticipate it eventually impacting.
Yeah, I mean, you've got leading metrics, which are critical because ultimately the revenue number is our goal, but that's a lagging indicator. And once the end of the quarter comes, it is what it is. So you've got to have a balance of both and understand what levers are available to pull to make that kind of influence. So that's where I'd say leaders need to start when they're bringing someone in. And what that means is you need to, when you're interviewing, make sure that you're bringing in candidate that understands how to do that. I would recommend even asking them to do some modeling for you when you get, down to your top one or two, because it's someone could have years of sales enablement experience. And I don't mean this in a disrespectful way at all. It's just what I've seen, and never have actually done the revenue exercise. Right. And there's it doesn't mean they're bad at sales enablement. It doesn't mean they're bad at all at it, but they really want to bring that skill set into the organization.
Yeah. I think if you think about like where a lot of sales enablement people come from, I think you're maybe a little bit of like kind of a weird unicorn here, insofar as like you used to be, you had a long span as being a sales leader and a sales manager. And this is something that we encourage our customers to do quite a bit, so much so that we actually host trainings that are like orchestrated by a gentleman named Richard Harris to help managers be better managers, because Atrium is in the business of helping them have better metrics in order to coach appropriately. But like managers oftentimes are not as coaching forward as they ought to be. So then taking someone who is a manager and a leader and being, ta-da, literally your job is to coach is a great way of doing that. A lot of other sales enablement people oftentimes come from a sales training background. Actually, a longtime customer of Atrium is this fantastic gentleman named Robbie Halford, who's at Sparrow right now. He was a teacher 15 years ago, but then he carried a bag. So he's kind of like
flipped it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like he was a teacher. Nice. Yeah. He was a teacher. But I think the important thing is, like, if you have somebody who comes from a sales training background, and they really do have to connect it to the impact and the metrics, like you were saying.
Yeah. And to be clear, in my experience, there are plenty of folks that haven't carried a bag that know how to do that. So so that's why I recommend having them do some modeling, not just talk to you about how they would do it. Because if they've done it, they're going to be able to give you a good sense in a presentation of how they've done it, how they do it, that sort of thing. I'll be honest, I came into enablement with a bias that I've had up until, I would say, fall of 2018, I think, that if you hadn't carried a bag, that you wouldn't be the best sales or revenue enablement person you could be, because it is such a binary, black and white life in sales. I mean, most people are used to having that nice private quarterly or annual performance review in a conference room out of earshot of everybody else. If you're in sales, anybody with a Salesforce login knows if you're failing or succeeding. I mean, it's just such a different world. But when I was at Vonage, we acquired a company called New Voice Media that was, New Voice. Okay, so San Francisco.
Yeah, Yeah, Eventbrite was a big customer of theirs. They were like an
Oh, okay.
early, early contact center. But if I recall correctly, I also had like a lot of recording kind of coaching functionality built into it. If I'm remembering
For
correctly.
agents, yes, yeah, absolutely. And Vonage acquired them, and they were actually headquartered in Basingstoke, England. And with that acquisition, we're a team of 2 sales enablement folks. And Claire and Bruce, if you're out there, it's a shout out. And what I learned was that you didn't have to have any sales background to be excellent at sales enablement. Bruce had done years of L&D with PepsiCo, HP, similar company. I think he was with Oracle for a while, right? So I'm a sales guy at heart. He's forgotten more about L&D and adult learning than I'll ever know, right? And so he brought that strength. Claire had been a police profiler in her career and then was a instructor of other police profilers. Now, that seems a bit odd, but you think about it in sales, how valuable a skill is that to be able to read,
right? Oh my gosh,
so,
right? Like you gotta size someone up really quickly. Like, I mean, this is what I tell my reps all the time is like, and we actually have this because I'm a big documentation guy because I'm like super anal. And like we have like our first call checklist, which includes pre-call planning, and literally what we talk about is like, persona, like not only do we have our persona trainings, the documentation, whatever, but it's kind of like, hey, during your pre-call planning, you have to look at the person's LinkedIn profile. You're looking at like you're doing like the Harry Potter sorting hat thing, like, hey, which school do they live in here, which persona are they, you're calling out. But even like second level where it's insufficient so like our key personas here at Atrium are like sales managers, sales leaders, SDR managers, SDR leaders, sales operations, and sometimes we'll enter accounts through enablement. So like one, which type of person is this? But then you got to get second level and say, how long have they been there? Are they junior in their career, right? So like, are they a sales operations person who was just like an SDR, 18 months ago? Cool. You're probably going to have a different type of conversation as compared to a sales operations person who came out of a finance role maybe 4 years ago, or a sales operations person who actually used to be a seller, used to be a sales, a sales leader, and then like moved over into. So like, sizing up those personas and profiling, if you will, can be extraordinarily important.
And she brought a lot of other strengths as well, but that was my eye opener from that point forward, realizing don't cast such a narrow net. And what I have found since is that if you start with a strong leader who understands what we've been talking about, then they fill in. You should always hire to your weaknesses anyway. And so finding a balance of people that have been quota carriers and people that have expertise in other areas like instructional design, things like that, that is the ideal that you want to get to. But the key is getting the right leader with the right mindset first.
I love it. Yeah. And I think that, yes. And so like, yes. So making sure that we have the right outcomes that we're modeling there, or like intending to do, and making sure that the staff is lined up against that. I mean, one of our, actually another Power Hour guest is a phenomenal woman named Terry Long, who's an leader at CV Insights. One of the things that she always talks about on their enablement team over there, like they're a longtime Atrium customer. And so while sales managers and sales leaders are the primary kind of consumers of kind of like the metrics and the views that come out of Atrium, the enablement team also uses it as a mechanism by which to evaluate the programs that they're doing. Like, hey, we went into like, maybe we have an org-wide initiative around AE prospecting, right? And like there's a bunch of stuff that goes into it, like sales operations went and like, did the big territory model and cleaned up all the cruft and got everybody like well balanced. So there was like, there weren't going to be like territory fights and so on and so forth. And, marketing got us some really great new, campaigns and sequences and whatever. And like all the ducks are on the pond. Like all you got to do is just start shooting. And then we're going to teach you how to do that, right? We're going to teach you, we're going to refresh everybody's memory on that. And then we're going to measure whether or not that actually happened, and we're going to hold people accountable to it. And so it always has like that metric associated with it. Like, cool, we're going to measure the success of this by, self-sourced opportunity creation by AEs, not by SDRs. And then that's a lagging indicator. And then a leading indicator to that would be like net new accounts that AEs have like attacked that they haven't touched before.
Right.
And then
Right.
pure activity stuff like email volume and call volume and what have you. So just like making sure that you have that full loop there can be
Agreed.
a very powerful thing. So one other thing that that I think you've presented on a couple of times is kind of the critical components of a revenue enablement strategy. And so I think you guys are is Instructure owned by Thoma Bravo, or is
Instructure? No, we did an intentional take private in that was finalized with TB in end of March of 20.
Right. So you gave a presentation to like an operating
and then
group
last
there,
summer
right?
they did take us back public, but they are still a major stakeholder, still a major stockholder.
Okay.
So,
got it. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that presentation that you did with that operating group.
Well, there's a CRO operating group that TB has, that Thoma Bravo has, and I report to our CRO. He's part of that operating group. Long story short, there was a lot of discussion going on around enablement. And so I was asked to come and present in one of their monthly meetings on what goes into a world-class enablement, sort of where you started off here, right? What are the pillars that you should be looking at? And if you don't have them, you know, how do you get there? And so that was the nature of the presentation that I talked to them. And it was, the audience was just all CROs from different portfolio companies. One of the pillars I've already talked about, which is that revenue-based strategy. Another one for me is all customer-facing groups need to be enabled together. In other words, a sales enablement team or revenue enablement team, more correctly in this stage, charter should include SDRs through renewals. And there's a lot of benefits that come with that. The biggest one, you mentioned persona-based messaging earlier. I could geek out with you on that for hours. The point being, that's only partially effective if the top of the funnel and the AEs are using it, but then the handoff, it just, all of that just disappears into Salesforce after the handoff. Renewals in the SaaS world, the renewal cycle starts the day a contract is signed and a CS takes over. Yeah, no matter how many years long the contract is. And so enabling those teams to continue the experience. I'm a big believer in differentiating by experience, Pete. We live in an experience economy. We all demand it. When we go shop, do business, buy a car, or anything, we demand it. Why would we think our customers would expect any less? And you can offer, the good news is in sales, and I can say this because I've a couple of decades doing it, the bar is sometimes low. The experience is not great. And so when I look what revenue enablement does, we should be elevating the seller's game so that they are differentiating by offering exceptional experience. That's how you earn the right to have the bigger conversations. And right. So again, I can spend time talking about that, but the whole point is that really needs to carry through the organization. And so revenue enablement is a thing. You know, when I did my first enablement gig at InContact, I was lucky that we had a leader over the CS organization that saw the value in that. We had that team going through side-by-side blended sessions on sales methodology. We were teaching the sellers, and it paid great dividends. So that's the second pillar I recommend is you've got to have a revenue enablement, or some people might think of it easier as a customer journey enablement program.
Yeah, for sure. I think that makes like one of my favorite, I hate the phrase thought leaders, but like one of my favorite publishers or content producers in the market is Winning by Design. So like Jacco Van der Kooij and Dominic Levin, and like, I mean, and then of all the assorted posse of smarties that they have working over there. And, you know, they really talk about like the bow tie, right? And it's not like the funnel and you get to a transaction, you're like, ta-da, we're done. It's like, no, it's only just begun. And I think like you see this in revenue operations, which I like how you talk about it being like a customer journey enablement function, because I think what ended up happening was like somebody decided like, oh, well, like revenue sounds like really fancy as compared to sales. Let's just call it revenue operations. It sounds you know, French and fancy. versus just like, hey, like it's just such like across the whole
What I
organization,
knew.
right?
Yeah.
Right, like the whole like
Yeah.
the whole customer journey there. Because like as an example, if you're not like if you don't have your SDRs understanding, use Atrium as an example, if you don't have the SDRs understanding the difference between like the pain points associated with like an SDR manager, right, or an SDR
Mhm.
leader versus like what an AE manager, an AE leader cares about and like what their pain points are versus what
Mhm.
a sales operations person cares about or an enablement person or a leader.
Mhm.
If they don't understand that, well, like how are they going to be able to like generate opportunities appropriately?
Right.
Similarly, when it gets down here to AE land, you know, AEs, that's usually where your enablement is going to be most focused. But then if you
Yes.
get over here into customer success land and all of a sudden like a user is a user is a user, it's like, no, 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 no. Au contraire, mon frere, right? Like, you know, an SDR manager is going to be really focused on these metrics right here. They're probably going to be
Mhm.
focused on measuring activity and kind of like at a more rapid clip. Then,
Mhm.
you know, AEs also like AE management and leadership is also really important to measure like leading indicators and like quantity metrics and quality metrics, but maybe the
Right.
aperture is going to be a little bit wider. We might like measure it on a monthly basis, like outputs on a quarterly basis and maybe inputs on
Mhm.
like a monthly basis, what have you. Like if customer success isn't understanding that, like for us, like it's gonna be bad. And then secondarily, it's especially problematic where you know, organizations are not selling like the whole kit and caboodle anymore, right? Like you don't go in and like sell wall to wall and like, you know, like eat the apple in one bite.
Mhm.
Buyers expect to like, you know, oh, well, like let's start with this team over here, right? Let's
Mhm.
have an initial initiative because I want to demonstrate utility first. So it's almost like the first year or the first 6 months, like even though it's like a closed one up with a
Mhm.
contract, like it's like don't get it twisted, it's kind of a pilot, right? And
Yeah.
so
Right.
if you're not driving success from the get-go there, and so what that means is that the customer success experience is selling that or like enabling and selling that
Mhm.
next transaction. They may not be selling
Exactly.
that next transaction, but like if they're not driving success, they're certainly not helping that incremental sale. So having enablement across all of that is just like absolutely critical.
And I've seen a trend in my experience of CS teams starting to actually take some quota. Right.
Yeah.
It may have a ceiling of 10K, right? And anything under 10K, the CS should take it and run with it. It could be a number of bird dogging opportunities generated a quarter. And a lot of CS organizations still aren't doing those, but it's definitely a trend that I've seen, which even makes the case stronger, I believe, for doing some sort of enablement. It's, you know, a lot of people that signed up to be a customer success manager didn't see themselves in a even sales-ish role.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of change management, but also we need to set them
Mhm.
up for success if that's the direction the organization decides to go.
Yeah,
Um,
and especially when, because if you think about it, especially when you're, and I imagine that actually Instructure is probably a great example of this. Is like when you have a new category of software that you're
mhm.
deploying, the change management is a sell in and of
Yeah,
itself.
yeah,
So
exactly.
like use us as an example, right? Like, you know, the notion of using metrics and data to
Mhm.
improve, like to enable managers and leaders in order to improve the performance of their teams. Like this is something that's like, I mean, it's only been around for like 10, you know, 10, 20-ish years. With the rise of like cloud databases like Salesforce, it became a little bit easier, still not super easy. Now with the ability to like, you know, record email, calendar, da, 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 like, so now the data is finally here, but the muscles haven't caught up yet. And so our
Mhm.
customer success function is doing a lot of work to help people like, you know, discovery and rediscovery to like provocatively open people's eyes to the negative implications associated with like not changing the way that they've done, you know, like done things for the last 20 years. The younger folks who are like, you know, all up on their Pelotons and their Stravas and their Apple Watches and their Whoops or whatever, they're like, yeah, of course, like why would you
Okay.
not use metrics to do
Yeah.
this? But and so this is like in our case, what we're always seeking to do is driving incremental use cases in our
Mhm.
customers. Like, oh, you have an AE, like the reason why you purchased Atrium was because you had an org-wide initiative on
Right.
pipeline hygiene or whatever, and you bought us in order to help with that. What's the next use case? What's the next use case? What's the next use case, et cetera. And so what that means is what we call rediscovery in our customer success org. And sometimes, like, helping people get comfortable with asking these questions, like these, what's the next thing? What's the next thing?
Right.
Versus like being there, like, I'm a waiter, right? Like, what would
Yeah.
you like to order next? Versus like,
Yeah.
my recommendation would be that now that we've
Right.
gotten, we've worked on your shoulders, I think it's time to work on, like, your back muscles a little bit. Like, what do you think about that? Are you on board with that? Yeah, let's go. Right. And like, being a little bit more aggressive and assumptive like that is something that everyone can do a better job at.
And I couldn't agree more. And one of the other benefits, so the third pillar for me is you need a custom global sales methodology. Now, when I say custom, I'm not meaning you got to go author and reinvent the wheel, but whether it's customer-centric selling, selling by design, or any of them, they're great off the shelf, but you need to customize or have someone help you customize to the degree where your personas and you're aligned with your Salesforce stages, and all of that is critical. The benefit for this transition that you and I have just been talking about is, in my experience, any good sales methodology, or at least worth its name, is going to teach reps to uncover success metrics, and that starts at the discovery. Right, what am I? Is it okay to mention Challenger sale? Oops, I just did. I don't see Challenger as a methodology, but it is a great approach and philosophy, and some of their principles I find very powerful. One of my favorites is in the chapter on discovery. They say at some point, if your prospect doesn't lean back and say, I haven't thought about that, you didn't have a great discovery meeting. You probably checked all the boxes, and you might have, made a good impression because you're just clicking on a personal level, but you did not have a great discovery meeting. And so by teaching us how to have a great discovery meeting, we uncover current state, impact of that, future state, potential benefits. That it becomes then your success metrics. And how powerful is it to be able to hand over those success metrics to that CS organization? Now, they actually have a way to early warning system if they're not seeing those customer success metrics happening, and a great way to run QBRs when they are. And it's just, so that's why to me a good solid method. And there's so many good ones. You might have heard the phrase, what's the best sales methodology? It's the one you use consistently. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. But get one, make it fit your organization, and then teach it to everybody.
Yeah. One thing we were talking about earlier was in a revenue enablement strategy, looking at those outcomes that you're wanting to attack. But then the first kind of question becomes, well, how do you identify what the biggest opportunities for improvement are in order to go after this? Like, how do you identify those top 3 that maybe you want to work on this quarter and next quarter? Like, where does that come from?
From a tactical standpoint?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a couple ways that that my teams and I have done it with success. One of the and you don't have to have a big tech stack to even be successful in doing that. So the easiest, if you will, way that we've developed and used is look at your sales process. Say you have 7 stages in your sales process, right? Do a spreadsheet, 7 Salesforce stages. Then think about what are the skills or experiences needed to be successful within each of those. So now you're starting to get a little more granular, right? So to be successful in executing stage 1, moving stage 2, reps need to be really good at these 3 things, stage 3, 2 to 3, et cetera. Once you've done that, then you can create a heat map with the input from your sales leaders. This is just, and there's multiple ways you could do this. But this is the way that my teams and I have done it in the past, right? And then you just code it so that all they have to do is put a 1, 2, 3. So for Bill and Sue, they're going across our processes and they're looking at the skills that each requires, and they're just putting in a 1, 2, or 3, and it's color coding into a heat map for that. That is a great visual way, and it's pretty analog. I guess as analog as a digital spreadsheet can be, but it's a great heat map, especially if you're trying to get a baseline to see. Now, as you build your tech stack, you mentioned some of the things that Atrium helps people do. There are tools that you can get more sophisticated about it, but what I don't want people to do is think, well, we can't afford that right now, or I'm an army of one. in a startup. I don't have that kind of budget. You can still get a great sense, but the key is involving your sales leaders, your frontline, I should say, sales leaders, because they know what's going on in a lot of the areas, and they'll be your best partners.
Yeah, and I think I really liked the way that you kind of talked about that, where it's like the enablement folks are responsible. And I think this kind of speaks to what we were saying earlier about like it being powerful to have enablement folks who have a sales background, so they can get a vibe as to like where there might be shortfalls in the organization. Or like, oh yeah,
Yes.
commonly you see these issues. The second thing too is that not being afraid of metricality, which is what you were just talking about, in order to diagnose where it's going
you have
on.
to embrace
so then
it.
then you do that, and then, but importantly, then you kind of show up with a menu to folks, and we're like, so which of these would you like to, versus if you just kind of show up and you're like, so what do you want us to like fix your team on? That's like, we would hope that managers would know, or like leaders might know, but I mean, very frequently they don't, because like they're just like so in the day to day of just like fighting fires and whatever. So they might just talk about like whatever is like the shiny object that they happen to be spun up about right now. It's like, oh, well, we need AEs to be prospecting more. And then moreover, if you do the exercise you were talking about earlier, it's like, well, how about if we like, I bet we would have to prospect less if like we didn't have this abysmal conversion rate out of disco. Because like literally we're just like pumping more ops into this like leaky bucket right here at the top, where, and in fact, actually it's these 5 reps out of our 20 who just like, have a miserable disco conversion rate. I think I have a theory. I think we need to get these guys dialed in. And then lo and behold, it's like, okay, that was the actual root cause of the problem. It wasn't about like AE prospecting, whatever. So showing up and having a point of view. And I think actually Terry from CB Insights actually has a great presentation on this about like challenger mindset in enablement, because you show up provocatively to your internal customer and say, these are the problems that I'm seeing in your organization from the discovery that I've done by talking to all your different managers, or these are the common problems. Which of these are resonating for you? Because then we can tackle those together.
And the other thing I love about that we've seen when we do a heat map like that, then it's really easy to identify top 10 based on what you collectively as leaders have said the teams are lacking in, right? Here are the top 5. What's one we want to start with? We probably have a recommendation. Sometimes you have a little bit of a funnel effect because you got to start with wider skills and then, bring it down. And we do have a question in the chat. Do you want to grab it now?
Oh yeah, let's grab it. Yeah, thank you. So Lisa asked us here, when rolling out a new sales methodology, which Paul was just remarking on earlier, what is the best way to get the sales leaders on board to hold the reps accountable to following the process? Change management, our favorite.
Management. Yes.
Paul, how do we tackle this?
It really starts with the senior executive leader in the org. And by that might be your CRO, your CSO, right? But who is the senior sales and or revenue leader in the organization? They have to not only want to have a solid methodology across the sales team, they have to understand the difference. And I'm borrowing this from my good friend Siobhan, the difference between what sales enablement is responsible for and what they're responsible to do. I have no illusions that a sales rep is going to do something because I think it's a good idea. If they've known me a long time and they trust me, they might, but it's critical that they understand that their sales leaders, why they're doing this, why it's a priority, what the projected outcome and benefits should be, because there actually are some that salespeople will see later on by having a strong methodology. Number one, their stress level goes down. A good methodology is going to help them drive, or help ops also drive the opinion making out of the funnel to a very large degree. And that means less stress in a salesperson's life, probably strep too, because stress makes us sick. But and so it's that top down. It needs to be very clear executive sponsorship, and then a very close alignment with your frontline sales leaders who are really the ones in the day-to-day. Rolling out a methodology, yes, but also The adoption, or as you put it, the change management needs to come after it's rolled out, is continuous. And one of the critical roles that frontline sales leaders have is, again, a good methodology is going to have you create consistent stages within your process that are not the rep's opinion, whether it's going to 1 to 2 to 2 to 3, et cetera. They are based on specific customer inputs that they're gathering in their discovery meetings and other customer meetings, and then are documenting in Salesforce. And so it takes a frontline sales leader with the stomach. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's scary to move opportunities back. But the reality is garbage in, garbage out. And so by the sales leaders being the one that are watching and making sure those customer inputs are actually there and are the reality check for what stage an opportunity is at, they need to have the courage to say, you know what? That's not really a 3. You need to put it back to a 2. But the next time we meet, these are the customer conversations I need you to go have. So that's, I don't know if that covers everything Lisa's looking for, but it has really got to start at the top. And you have to have very close alignment with your frontline sales leaders, who should be listening to what interests their boss should also fascinate them. Again, that's why it starts at the top. So
yeah, for sure. We have another great question here from Chris here. How do you tie results from a revenue-based strategy back to enablement? Many things such as marketing and other company activities can impact revenue. I can take a shot at this initially, and then Paul, have your kind of take on it as well. I think this is kind of like the thing we were mentioning earlier about that. If you're doing an enablement initiative, it should have an intended metric that it's going to hit.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I'll use some examples that Atrium customers use, right? So maybe you've got like a mid-market or an SMB sales organization where they have they manage a lot of ops concurrently, it's kind of the opposite of an enterprise motion, and they might have a pipeline hygiene problem, right? And that might be across the entire organization. And this might have been identified by the fact that, across 30 reps or whatever, the average number of 30 days untouched opportunities might be 15 out of the 50 that was in somebody's pipeline or what have you. That's obviously, that represents, a lot of opportunity cost because marketing spent good money and good effort in order to get those ops on the calendar. So we should do something about it. Great. We're going to execute an enablement program where what we're going to do is we're going to teach people how to do better pipeline hygiene. We're going to have a checklist for how they should be going about these things. We're going to refresh the managers on how to run effective pipeline, pipe review meetings. We're going to give them the relevant assets in question, like maybe it's some Salesforce views or some, reports or whatever, in order to do that. And then we're going to intentionally put say, hey, we're going to put time on the calendar for everybody, 90 minutes on Tuesday afternoons for people to, clean that stuff up. That is a all-encompassing program that has a lot of steps in it that is executed maybe over 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever. Cool. Then once that starts happening, we're going to measure that metric, that untouched opportunity metric, and it should be going down both in aggregate across the entire company. But then moreover, what we should be doing is looking at each individual rep as well to see who's taking care of business, who's not taking care of business, and maybe needs a little bit of encouragement, maybe a little fun social encouragement, et cetera, et cetera. And then ideally, so then once that comes to fruition, boom. Right. It's a time-based A/B test there. Hey, look, untouched opportunities went down. And then moreover, win rate went up. And then lo and behold, bookings went up, or productivity on a per rep basis. So that would be an example of, hey, we have an intention associated with this program. We're going to execute it. These are the intended metrics that are going to be hit accordingly. Did it happen? Did it not happen? In that sort of situation there, you have a time-based A/B test. So you don't have to worry about more revenue showed up as a result of the fact that, there was more of a marketing push or what have you. It's well, not really, because if there was more of a marketing push, it would have just been a more ops situation. Win rates would not have gone up. Win rates going up is tied to pipeline hygiene getting better and pipeline execution being better. So that's one example of how to do that. Paul, what would you say on that?
I mean, I agree with Chris asked the question. There are a lot of factors, and that's why I intentionally use the word correlation, I don't believe
Totally.
that you can ever tie anything
No.
specifically back to enablement
Don't
or
need to.
marketing, et cetera. You don't need to. But I agree with what you're saying. If you're rolling out a new initiative, you need to have, if a sales leader comes to my team or I and says, hey, I think we need training on X, one of the first questions that we ask, politely, of course, is what's the outcome you're looking for? Because
What's our goal?
sometimes that process has not been thought through, right? And it's not that it's a bad idea, but if we don't know the outcome, then why do we want to invest time, resource, and the reps' time? But what about things that aren't new initiatives, right? So when you look at something like your onboarding program, you're probably continuously improving it, but it's not new. So what things you go back and look for? Well, if you're onboarding SDRs and having individual, probably not time to get into that today, but I have some really strong experiences and opinions on how you build great onboarding. But what you should see is those typical SDR metrics and watch their ramp time. If you've got a baseline of how long it takes SDRs to get to full productivity, we can all probably fill in the blank on the metrics. They're pretty basic metric, but you should see that time to ramp shrink. And you should be looking at that. If you're measuring AEs when they come out of their onboarding, their time to full funnel. I'm not a big fan of time to first deal because they could have inherited something. Time to second deal, I find more useful.
Bluebirds can be like a total head fake.
Yeah. But why I'm more interested in what is their time to a full funnel? Whatever full funnel means to your organization, we got to get them there fast as we can, and the sales will follow. So I think you can look back at existing programs and find the same metrics. But I'll emphasize again, work with your sales leaders. Your sales leaders are customer. Your sales reps, I would suggest, are your end users. And so your customers really need to be feeling those metrics, and they have to be the ones that they care about or should care about as well.
Yeah, totally. I do a master class on data-driven ramp management. Super fun. It talks about the importance of paying attention to those leading indicators. Maybe Angelica can grab the link when she gets a chance and drop it in the chat. I think people will be pretty juiced on it. But yeah, understanding that people do how people are going there, and then also the thing I was kind of mentioning earlier about linkages between the output metrics and the inputs. This is actually, we have these handy metrics driver tree guides here. This is an SDR one right here, and then this is an AE one right here. That way you can say, hey, I'm trying to impact bookings, but the way that I'm going to do that is through win rate, which we were saying earlier, which is coming from pipeline hygiene as measured by untouched ops. That might be different than, oh, we're going to impact bookings through attempts, which is coming from new op inflow, which is coming from prospecting behavior on the part of the AEs, or maybe we're going to impact revenue through ASP. And the way that we're going to drive a higher ASP is, who knows, maybe it's discount avoidance, or maybe what it is it's actually op expansion, right? Hey, how can we look at an opportunity to get that incremental seed in there? Or maybe it's something adding professional services or whatever. Whatever it is, right? We've got our revenue down here, and then we've got win rate, ASP, deal cycle. There might be enablement around compressing deal cycles, number of attempts that we're doing, and then there's upstream metrics for those guys that we then that are, and the metrics are not actually the thing that is being enabled. They're just echoes of the behavior. Right? They're just echoes of the behavior.
So Chris has an add-on clarification, thoughts on product enablement. You want me to take a stab at that first, Pete?
Yeah, 100%. And I imagine what Chris means there is helping people understand more about the product that they're selling and what have you.
That's what I'm assuming as well. A couple of key areas for me when I think of product enablement is, number one, please don't teach the salespeople features. And I mean by that, not feature benefit either. What our sellers need to be able to do is to go into a discovery situation and have the skills to run a conversation that is going to help that prospect begin to create a vision of how some combination of the use cases our product provides is going to help them reach their ideal state. It doesn't matter what we think. Of course, we think everything we sell is the bomb. They don't care, right? We have to help them start creating that vision. And the problem when you train people, as product training is primarily on feature benefit, feature whatever, what they tend to do is be too much of a feature dumper when they're in discovery, which is not really discovery. That comes later.
Later, we're going to tie them to the things that were revealed. Yeah.
So product management, product enablement should always be focused around personas, which we already touched on, and the use cases that we know as an organization. We have intelligence. We know which of our use cases typically solve the problems that persona typically has. That's how I do and recommend that folks do product training. It's about use cases. It's about outcomes. There may be a time it's an RFP or something, you have to get into features, but please don't do that going into discovery. And to that end, I have found that our sales engineers in most organizations I've been in are the ideal person to lead product trainings. No offense to my PMM friends. Some of them are great at it, but they don't have.
They see where the rubber hits the road.
That's it. SEs know how to look at our use cases and products through the eyes of a customer. And I found they're usually some of the most effective product training deliverers.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's and there, I think there's a corollary to that, which is they're so good that oftentimes some of your best product managers come out of SE, right? Because they just have like so much customer intimacy. It's funny, I hadn't thought about that from a training standpoint. Like I'm more familiar with SE, the SE CSM to like PM pipeline.
Right.
But I think there's another implication there, which is like, cool, even that before they become a PM, they can be doing product training for your organization and what have you. I love it. So when we talk about like revenue enablement, I want to go through your. I'm glad that you included your deck. Maybe we can actually do an incremental event. I think it would be absolutely fantastic for you to present that presentation to the larger modern sales community. I think people would be like really jazzed up on it. But when you think about revenue enablement versus sales enablement, what are the kind of the big deltas there? I know that we were talking about personas earlier, and we were joking about like revenue is just like a fancy French way of saying sales. But of course, it's like that's not really the point here. What are the biggest deltas between like a legacy sales enablement concept versus a customer journey enablement or a revenue enablement program?
That's a big one. So let me start with this. At the surface, we've already hit on it. You're not just focused on sellers. They are maybe still your biggest lever, but that is not the only audience for your enablement activities. If you are in a CRO environment like I'm in, what about enabling your marketing members when they join? Right? You may not be able to do, and we haven't even talked about ongoing professional development, right? Onboarding gets a lot of love because it's not an easy win. It can be a quick win. It's very measurable, things like that. But the ongoing professional development is just as critical. And in my framework that I've created for building enablement teams, I believe enablement has a role in setting people up for their next level job. Once they're from, so I look at reps as new, versed, proficient. And once a rep is proficient for a certain amount of time, then we should be proactively working with leaders to develop an aspirational program so that those folks see a pathway and don't feel like they need to look around outside. So who's thinking of marketing? Who's thinking of RevOps? We already talked about CS organizations, renewal organizations. That's one definition of revenue. But the other one is really never losing sight of the fact that what we do has got to tie back in a reasonable way or correlate back. I have found the concept, not my concept, strategy or focused organization, Kaplan and Norton, Harvard Business Press. And it's called strategy mapping, and then a balanced scorecard that you use. Not enough time to talk about it fully here, but essentially you've seen a strategy map. It's in the stuff that I sent you before the show. But you learn how to build one of those that guides your thinking as you're looking at a strategic level across your enablement program, and lets you be sure that every element of it is tying back to at least one of three financial metrics, which is the recommendation by the people that wrote this methodology of strategy, is have 3 revenue targets or 3 revenue metrics you're chasing. The balanced scorecard is how you then take that down to what are we doing this quarter, this week, et cetera. And like I say, lots more we could talk about there, but those are the things I think about with revenue enablement.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when, man, it's funny that you said the thing about like marketing, because I think another thing that, because I work with like very early stage organizations a lot of time, like Instructure is a very fancy sales organization. Like, you know, as we were joking about earlier, you're very seasoned, you've been around the block, you know, just an appropriate amount of times. But like, so I think that one of the things you said there is like, onboarding is always something that like makes hay, right? It's great. Like if you're not onboarding people appropriately, like Jiminy Christmas is gonna be terrible, right? I think there's a really interesting kind of like quick win that we actually ended up doing at Atrium, where I actually have a product marketing and product management background. My mom is actually a teacher, and so like I'm, you know, our organization jokes about the fact that I just like emit slides and like documents. They just like fly out of my fingers and what have you. So our onboarding, our onboarding muscles were actually pretty solid early on, but with respect to our AEs. And it was kind of like a bonehead move in retrospect, is we didn't use those like persona trainings and like demo, like product training and what have you for other parts of the organization as quickly as we should have. And we kind of had this like no duh moment where it was just like, oh, what, you know, why aren't our customer success people like doing our persona training? Why aren't our SDRs doing our persona training? And because the cool thing is that all those documents and slide decks, and in this case, I used to deliver our product, our training, like live face to face, or not face to face, so like Zoom to Zoom, and like record them using like Chorus. You have these documents, you have these recordings, just, you know, give access. It was just like a you know, kind of like a booty LMS there. And I think that like organizations can do that, like can use the assets that they might be using to enable their sales team, just give access to other parts of the organization. Like, hey, did you realize that this was available, that we have this personas class over here? And then marketing might be like, oh my God, I had no idea. Right? Or customer success might be like, oh my God, I had no idea. And that, I think that can be like a very powerful thing. Given that we're kind of coming up on time here, what would kind of like be, you know, the one sort of thing if people wanted to, you know, to invest in an earlier stage revenue enablement, you know, sales enablement program, maybe outside of just like getting their onboarding tight, what would be like the next thing that you would recommend to folks to kind of focus in on there, that's like, you know, kind of a can't miss for like, we've talked about how to like, you know, detect things and like, you know, talk to the CRO or like heat map or whatever, but what's like a, you know, a can't miss sort of thing that people could implement, do you think?
Boy, I wish there was a can't miss something in any part of life, but I'll give you one I think is one of your best bets.
Close enough, right? Yeah, best bet.
And that is if you're
high
a small
probability
team and you're So once you get comfortable with your onboarding, then I would pivot to leadership enablement. The
100%.
professional development of the team is critical, but the problem is until you've enabled your sales leaders, remember many of them came from within the ranks. They very often are functioning as super closers, not leaders, and helping them break that mold and understand how to run effective pipeline conversations, understand how to coach to you know, behavior changes or activity changes and that sort of thing. Then you can come back to professional development because you've got a partner team that's ready to help you take it on. That would
that's, man, that is such like a thoughtful strategic recommendation there, because like we have this internal phrase that we use here at Atrium called like managers matter. In fact, like one of our pitch decks is called the managers matter deck, and it's just so like, having 2, 3, 4, 5 managers where you like up level them, that then is levered across 5, 6, 7, 8 reps, right? Versus, and so it's just like extraordinarily impactful. in that regard. And organizations like just don't do it. This is like why one of my favorite books that we send to prospects and customers is 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach by Hillman Sori and Corey Bray. We're just
Two of
like,
my best buds. I know, I love those guys. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but Hillman and Sori get me excited. Hillman and Corey get me very excited. Great guys.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. We love that that publication because helping managers be more effective. Now you've got leverage. And I think you really nailed it there. You're kind of like cheating as the sales enablement person because like now you've got a bunch of like sleeper cells, right? So like rather than
I'm going to use that. That's great. Yeah.
Rather than like you being responsible for, you know, enabling all of the reps, it's like, no, I have my minions, right? My managers, like they're kind of like my little helpers there. I love it. Well, Paul, this is absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. We'll get another event going here where we can, you know, go through your revenue enablement deck. I think the MSP community would absolutely love that. And then maybe we get another event going where we talk about manager enablement because like, man, that's just like an wildly under like invested in topic and just like such an area for leverage. Folks, thanks for joining us. Next week, we've got the illustrious Melina Call. She's a VP of sales at Atrium, actually. So she used to be a sales leader at SalesLoft, at Flock Safety. She's absolutely fantastic. So please come join us then. Paul, you have a fantastic time at the Cougars game tomorrow. You know, I hope they win. I hope the Gators win as well. And then let me know if you end up traveling for the BYU Stanford game. And then otherwise we'll get that dialed in. We'll get those incremental events dialed in. Okay.
Thanks, Pete. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Take care.
Take care.